G'day guys, up next we've got some smooth operators. They mightn't look cool, they might both have funny accents, but they're the guys you need when you've got a mess in your project. Let's check it out. G'day guys, today I'm here with some architects, Marcel and TJ.
Yeah, my name is Terje Sandström.
Right. And you're from Norway?
Yes, that's right.
And you're from Holland?
From the Netherlands.
The Netherlands, yeah. Sorry about that. So I thought today what we would do is have a look at an existing code base which I've just given you, and rather than just talk about architecture, we'll use the goodness of Visual Studio and go through it. But before we do that, I might ask a little bit about yourself, Marcel.
Okay, my name is Marcel. I'm technology manager at Info Support in the Netherlands.
Yep.
I'm a regional director for the Netherlands and also an ALM MVP.
Great. And TJ?
Yes, I'm a scientist at Meta in Norway.
Right.
Working with architecture, code quality, TFS, stuff like that.
Okay, all right. So have you guys ever worked together before?
No, we haven't.
Well, you will today.
First time you met.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. All right, so what I want to do is I want to go through step by step what you guys do when you encounter a brand new code base, and what are the very first steps. And like I have my own ideas on certain things, but I'm interested to see how much you guys end up syncing together. Okay?
Cool.
All right, so you've got the code base.
Yeah.
We've got Visual Studio 11. Hopefully it's in beta, but it'll probably end up Visual Studio 2012 or something like that if we get it this year. Okay, so Marcel, we're just starting with a fresh solution. What's the very first thing you do?
Well, the very first thing you do is just, let's see if the thing compiles, right? And if we have all the dependencies set up.
Okay.
Right. I would go right click, do a rebuild solution, and see what we find there, because we might already get errors or get some warnings and stuff in there.
Okay, and TJ, do you concur with that?
Yeah, I'll also do that. Especially if you see it now, it's succeeded. It means you don't have any errors, but there might be warnings.
Yeah, so we can go to the error list, for example. Oh,
right.
well, here we have it. So we already have found a variable that's not used in our code.
Okay, all right, good. Now, we've got the thing compiled. If there were problems with it compiling, is that a showstopper, or is there some best practices?
It's not a showstopper, but I will very often use this as clues to go in and look at that code.
Right.
I don't do all the steps up front. I'll go take one thing and use that clues to dive into the code and just take a quick check.
Okay.
So for example, on this warning, we could now jump into the code and see, okay, what is that variable?
Okay. Yeah, if it doesn't compile, I 9 out of 10 times just hand it over to the devs again, because we have strict rules that everything that's in version control I should do a get. There's only one dependency folder I know of, which we set up, and it should just write compile there. If it doesn't, I might have a look, and if there's a README file or anything there that we might use to need setup instructions or anything like that.
Okay.
But,
so let's. We do have a rule to have some. We have an. If you go to that documentation folder there, we always have underscore instructions.
Okay, cool.
And that tells if you have to install any third-party tools or anything like that. That has a whole series of instructions of what you need to do to get this thing up and running.
Okay, right.
All right. So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
If I find a document, I will take the extra step and try if I can make it work that way.
And we have another step for deploying, that there's the underscore instructions deploy, which would tell you the steps to go ahead to deploy it. Okay.
Oh, interesting. So you guys just deploy from Visual Studio, I see here.
Well, maybe with this project. Because
this just pops up directly for me as an ALM guy, right? I expect my build
from the build
to go to a release or to the website or whatever I push it on. I would never deploy it from a Visual Studio environment.
One thing is, it's very good to have things documented, but you should then be moved, because this may contain information that is essential to set up the build. Yeah. But when this is done, it should be moved into a build, as Marcel says, and also the setup instructions, if they take up more space than, let's say, one page, I will also move that into a PowerShell script.
Okay, all right. I think the end goal usually is to end up with continuous deployment to the test server.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the holy grail, right?
There's two parts of here. One is deployment, the other was the instruction of how to set up an environment.
Yep.
The environment should be done through a PowerShell script.
And some of these, sometimes the hurdles are third-party controls. If you're using Infragistics, you actually have to install and put the key down.
Yeah, you need to install it on each and every build server then.
Yeah.
And other tools don't require that. But yeah.
Yes. Yeah, one of the nice things about Telerik is they don't force you to.
Yeah, that's the great thing.
Yeah. You can just grab the binaries and they work.
Yep.
Okay, so let's assume everything's compiled now.
Yep.
What's the next step now?
So, of course, in Visual Studio we have this tool set which is called dependency analysis. So we can, for example, take a look at the dependency graphs and see if we might get some smells out of there.
Okay, is that under the architecture menu?
Yeah, so that's under the architecture menu here, and I could say I would like to generate a dependency graph. I can do it for the solution or only for one file.
Okay.
I would take the solution because that gives me an overview of the architecture of the whole setup that you've done here. So I'll go in here.
Do you do this before looking at the solution names or after?
Well, it kind of depends. In our company, we have certain strict rules on how we should name stuff. So I would like to call out all the layers that we have in our architecture. So one of the things I have here is, of course, a Visual Studio solution with MVC. So if that's the case, then I would go and look and say, okay, where's my MVC project? Is there, like I see here, something with EF?
Yep.
It might say, well, you're using Entity Framework, for example.
Yes.
So I might dive in there and see what the model would look like. Domain might resonate that you're doing domain-driven design or not. If that's the case, then I might dive in there and see how you guys created the solution domains. Yeah.
So you're looking at this dependency graph. Does it tell you anything? I assume you get rid of the test and the externals.
Normally we clean it up a little bit.
Okay, so let's clean it up a little.
Yeah, so we go through externals. I don't care too much about that, so that would clean it up a little bit. One of the things I do is normally I get rid of the unit tests because I'm just looking at the solution and how the architecture of the solution is, so I don't need a test for that. And I might try and have a look. So I see here that we have a dependency on the Entity Framework, which looks good. But now what we have is that Entity Framework also has a dependency on the domain model, which is kind of interesting because I would expect the domain model to be dependent on the Entity Framework and not the other way around.
One way to look at this is to see this as levels. At the lower level here we have the domain model, and as Marcel says, I would also expect the data to be placed below this one. Here you can see 3 layers in practice here: a user interface layer, and then something in between, and where I would expect the domain layer to be, and then the data and infrastructure further down.
Yeah, so what you see here is that you see the thicker lines. The thicker lines mean that there's a harder dependency or there's more dependency on it. And here you see a small line, which might be only one dependency here, or one call. So what you see here is that this is very interesting, right? So we have the web UI right calling into the Entity Framework over here, and all the other stuff goes through the domain model. So I would expect it to go from my web to my domain, then to the Entity Framework. And those are kind of ideas that you might have and say, well, this we'll dive into. Yeah.
One interesting observation here is that we have this concept called anemic domain models, which means you have domain model which doesn't contain any behavior, just data.
Yeah.
This might be an indication that that is what we have here. We don't want anemic domain models.
So we hit our first smell.
So this is really a smell that we could dive into and see and figure out how, why that might be there. And there might be a good reason for it. I always, it's a smell, right? Yep. But it might be a good smell. So,
it might be that this is a misconception, that this is not really the domain model, but this is data objects. This is the data being picked up from the database, but that should not be named domain because it's not the domain objects.
What would you name it?
The data.
The data. Okay.
Data objects or something like that.
Okay.
Agree, Marcel?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So are we done with the dependency graph?
Yeah. So what you could do and dive deeper in this diagram, so I could dive into this domain model and stuff.
That one.
Yeah.
That is the data objects. Then it becomes pretty interesting that the web UI goes directly into the anti-framework model, and then this one. This is also something to do with data. There is no service layer in between here.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And also
smell. The thing is that it might that the architect thought, well, this is just a simple app. I only need to crank it out in a week and we're done. Then it might have done it this way. If it's a commercial product, which you will keep forward for, let's say, 10 years or more, then you need some more strict layering, some more stuff in there to make it more resilient to change over time.
Exactly. Another thing here is, it could be interesting to take a look into the web UI to see how much business logic we got in there.
Right.
Yeah.
If that is filled up with business logic, then we know it really has hit something.
Okay, so we've done the dependency graph. What's the next step after the dependency graph?
It can be to use some kind of metrics tools, and we can either use AntiPatterns, which is a pretty extensive suite.
What was that?
A pretty extensive tool.
Oh, yes.
It has a lot of functionality. It makes dependency graphs which shows you both how things are dependent upon each other and also how abstract stuff is.
Right.
And that way it gives you kind of a green band where stuff is going to be placed, and there's kind of red zones where you're not going to place them. So you find stuff in the red zone, then you know it's not to be there.
So Marcel, do you concur? Is the next tool AntiPatterns?
AntiPatterns could be a tool. I probably prefer to go into the architecture diagrams that my architect crafted first. So I want to have a look at did he create a layer diagram? Yes or no? If so, I would match it up and see if that makes sense or not. Okay. I would use my PowerPoints or anything else that I gave my dev team to work from, and then see if they did it the way I like it.
And since we're doing kind of pair architecturing here, I'm not sure if that's a term, we're going to go with AntiPatterns or the documentation? Which way?
I think we could go to documentation.
We can go to documentation.
Take a check there.
Okay, all right.
So do you have documentation for this particular app, or should I just...
No.
I can just show you stuff that we do in our organization, and that might resonate with you.
Okay, is that generated from the code, the documentation?
No. So the documentation is what I do as an architect up front.
Oh, before writing code?
Yeah, before writing code. I know that...
It's not very agile.
Well, I think it's very agile. The thing is that I want my team to do the stuff I want them to do, instead of just cranking out code, which doesn't make sense.
And how much time do you spend making this architecture plan?
What I normally do is work one sprint before the team goes and does something. Okay. So in sprint one, I'm working on the diagrams that the stuff they need to do in the next sprint. They can just take those diagrams and then crank out the code.
I don't think we're not talking about what we call big design up front.
No, not at all.
We're talking about conveying the ideas. The architecture has, I want this stuff to have a web server, I want it to have a cache here and there, I want it to be so and so. That has to be expressed. To express that in form of architecture diagrams, I think it's a fair idea.
Can we have a look at one?
Yeah, one of the things I can show you is that for a big system that we needed to create, what I've done is I created 3 scenarios, which I discussed with my team and said, what is the best way that we can do it? But I had some ideas to do it, and I created some sequence diagrams for that, and they can work from that and create code out of that. So for that, I use Enterprise Architect because it gives me a little bit more, the design service that I can work from. So
this is a third-party tool. These are Aussies?
Yeah, these are Aussies, yeah.
That's good. Expensive?
No, not at all. You pay about $300 or $400 for a full version of the product.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think it's amazing stuff. So what you see here is one of the systems I was architect on, and you see that these are the use case diagrams. So you see the actors and all the stuff that's going on and all the stuff that we needed to build. And one of the things that I did is to say, okay, I need to group this into what we call functional areas, and from that design a kind of a domain model, you might think. And we designed that into services. So one of the things I've done is have a look at, for example, how we would like to do a particular sequence of work. So what I've done is created one sequence over here where I say, well, I have these interfaces that I want to talk to because these are the services that I want to interact with. And one of the ideas I had that this actor would do a call to register some stuff and then it will go and do all its stuff it needs to do, like register it, put it in a database, etc., etc. So this is one of the designs I made. But on the other hand,
hold on, can I, before you go any further?
Sure.
TJ, what do you think? Is this similar to what you do?
I would do that very rarely. In some special cases, I might do it, but I'm very careful of not going too far in this direction.
So this is in more detail than what you would do?
It depends. I don't know what this solution, what it is, but I wouldn't.
Neither do I. It's in Dutch.
No, exactly. It's, I can read it, so that's no problem. But you have to know if this is a particular difficult problem. Right. As an architect, I would go in and do this. Yeah. But if not, I would not do it. I would normally keep to what you mentioned, the domain model, and the use story models, and just make, perhaps even connect those two together to show what domains should be affected by which user story and so on, and then leave that to the developer to do the stuff.
Yeah, so the thing here was that it was a very complex problem that we needed to solve, and that's the reason I crafted up 3 diagrams. And we ended up implementing this one, which was asynchronous, because then we could have a better user interaction model there. I agree with Terje that we don't do this for everything in our system, only for the complex stuff that we need to think up front instead of just cranking out the code and then do refactoring like a maniac, and then we would spend perhaps 4 or 5 sprints making it right. And now because we have this design going on, we think up first what we want to have in terms of dependencies and calls.
As I say here, you say you have 3 diagrams for an application, and that's fine by me. Yeah. No problem with that. That sounds...
Do you use the tool Enterprise Architect as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is the stuff that I would do as an architect, and then what I would do is then go back to the code base and see, well, can I find this interaction pattern there, and did I craft it the way I would like it to see? Great.
What if they don't have Enterprise Architect? Do you use any other tools?
I use PowerPoint a lot.
Do you have a sample?
Do I have a sample? I can look up a sample. Yeah, I think I do have a sample, but it's not to in the same problem domain.
Let's go.
But what I have over here is stuff that I did just a few weeks ago.
So when do you use PowerPoint, and when do you use, Enterprise Architect?
I don't use PowerPoint for this. I use, in fact, Visual Studio. There's a model project type inside Visual Studio which can be used. It's more lightweight than Enterprise Architect, but it can be used as a as a lightweight, poor man's way of making sequence diagrams and stuff. So it can be used.
So this is one of the things I did with my team. We needed to come up with a solution that we wanted to use RIA services, but we wanted to use RIA services from Silverlight and from MVC.
Right.
So what we've done is we created a little layer where we could kind of abstract it away. And we did it in a first sprint, and I didn't like it the way they crafted it up. So I call this the harmonization of the domain service we had in MVC. So I crafted up this document for what we had and what I wanted to have, and I just go through.
Can we F5 through it?
We probably can F5 through it.
Or the important page?
Yeah, so the important page is this is what they had, and then I had a whole story on why I wanted it differently, and then I go over here and say, well, this is the layering I want to go on.
Okay.
This is the way I would like to have the composition going on, and this is the final solution that I want you guys to create.
Right.
And then it's just simple boxes and lines, and here you see kind of an interface thing going on, and this is what I would look for then in the final solution. Yeah.
So, TJ, what do you think about this?
Yes, I will make the same type of diagrams, absolutely, but I will make them using Visual Studio's architecture tools, because you can do exactly the same thing there. That's what I would
Can you just point out those architecture tools just for reference?
Yeah, no problem. So what you could do over here, but what you need to do then is first you need to add a solution to your solution, and that would be a new type of project. And this type of project would be a modeling project. So we go here to modeling projects, and I just use modeling project 1, that would be good enough. And then next,
add an item to it?
Yeah, add an item to it. So add any of the UML diagrams.
Have class diagrams, sequence diagrams,
Right.
activity in this case, the component diagram, for example.
Yeah, and the layer diagram is one I like most, because that's a fantastic diagram. I can even use that diagram to enforce it in my build. So if I want to set up a layering pattern, and I say, well, there's no way that you're going to call from the UI the entity framework, which we saw in your code base, then I could set up a layer diagram, and the build would fail if somebody violates that rule.
So can I just try to establish the decision points? When do you use this in Visual Studio, and when do you use the PowerPoint, when do you use the Enterprise Architect? Well,
I use the Enterprise Architect if that is in the organization.
Yeah. That's your first preference?
That's first preference.
Yeah.
The second preference is to use this tool if they have the ultimate edition, or the architects have the ultimate SKU.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if that is all that is failing, then you have to go down to PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think it depends on my team. So if I have a team with my dev lead who is more into architecture, I might probably use Enterprise Architect. But if I have a team with only devs that don't like to dive into this tool and learn the tool, I just want to give them some pictures they can look at and point out what I want to happen.
So I just want to call out to you on before we go off this documentation.
Sure.
One of the dangerous things about the documentation is it gets out of date.
Yeah.
In Scrum we call it technical debt.
Yeah.
Do you make sure that this keeps up to date? Do you have any problems? Like Scrum kind of says, chuck it out almost.
Exactly.
You know,
that's what I do.
you chuck it out after doing it. So no more Enterprise Architect files, no more PowerPoint files.
Next, let's say that the code is going to be revised in 6 months later. And take up the diagrams, and then I make these matches, which Marcel is talking about. See if the code and these diagrams matches what I have in the drawings. If they don't, I may fix it or may just add or change to it, and then add from there.
Yeah.
I don't care about keeping those updated. Normally for a long-term project, it's just the way the ID was expressed.
Right.
I call it often the ID architecture. And this is the implemented architecture.
Okay.
And they may differ.
Marcel, do you concur with that?
Well, not quite. So it depends again.
Yep.
If I'm building a big system and I think that having a good grasp of what the all-over architecture is, I want to keep the diagrams in sync, but there's no way you can do it if you don't add value to it. So what I try to do is, for example, what I've done with the project I showed you before is we wanted to make sure that the layering that went on was good enough, and we keep using that. So one of the things we did is we did code generation of, for example, all the security data that we had in there. So we generated the schemas instead of crafting the schemas by hand. And that way we have all the messaging that we have going on in our application just in Enterprise Architect. We have all the dependencies in there, and I can do impact analysis as well. So some people think that's big design up front, but it just, you design it gradually. And I have developers that create plugins in Enterprise Architect to generate all the code that they need. So we could do very easy refactoring instead of doing it all by hand. So when it makes sense, I would like to keep the diagrams and the models. If it doesn't make sense and it's just a small app, don't bother and just throw it away.
Right.
I don't care.
Okay.
I don't disagree with Marcel here. Okay. It's some of the same thinking. They're more likely perhaps to throw it away.
Right.
Or just let it stay.
Okay.
Another thing, the point you have with generating stuff from Enterprise Architect, we're doing exactly the same thing from the user case models. We're generating work items from the user case in Enterprise Architect. That is one part we maintain. And we maintain the user stories from Enterprise Architect and push it down to TFS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So we still haven't got into the code yet.
No.
Is that the next step?
You want to see some code?
Yeah, we're architects, right? So we kind of try to keep it high level first and see where we can find smell. So one of the next steps you might take is say, let's go with what we discussed before, like AntiPatterns, and go into code metrics, right?
Right.
And have a look there and see if we can find anything that's of particular interest.
So TJ, do you agree the next step is AntiPatterns after documentation?
Yes.
Okay.
We can go,
right.
since we don't have AntiPatterns there, we can use the built-in.
Yeah, so we can use the version that's in Visual Studio, which is not AntiPatterns. AntiPatterns dives a little bit deeper, but we can use what we call the code calculation. So code metrics calculation.
So you would do AntiPatterns if you had AntiPatterns next,
well,
and
in
then.
fact, the way I normally do code metrics in Visual Studio are more lightweight than AntiPatterns.
Right.
So normally I will start off, in fact, with the built-in stuff. And most developers don't need to go any deeper than that. Because if I see something wrong here, and if it's really says that something is going on, then I'll use AntiPatterns to dive deeper.
Right.
So AntiPatterns is a dive deeper tool.
So Marcel, do you concur that the next step is code metrics and then it's AntiPatterns?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
I agree with that.
So let's go with code metrics.
Sure. So code metrics, by the way, only work when your solution builds. So that's one of the things that needs to be in place. And now we can dive deeper and see, okay, what's happening here? So what do we see in terms of code?
Is this the first time you start learning about who the coders are?
Well, we don't know who the coders are yet. No.
We soon will when we find out the the messy code.
You wrote it?
No.
Okay.
I'm not going to take the blame.
Oh, okay.
But do you typically find this is kind of the first stage where you kind of start seeing the bad coders when you see the high numbers?
Well, you only see it when you do an annotate on the version
Yep.
on version control, right? So if I dive in the code and say, well, I now found this method which goes on and on and on forever, I would right-click and see who contributed to that function, because I expect all my developers to be very conscious about writing very large methods. So it would probably not blame one person, because people just pile on to that method, and I would go and have a talk with all of them.
All right.
I would say I normally, in fact, don't do that if I find bad code. If I find bad code, I very often don't want to know who did it, because I want to talk with the team. And the guy who wrote that code, he knows very well that he wrote it.
Yeah.
That I don't know it makes me more innocent towards those people. That I
Right.
don't feel like a blamer. And it's important that the team learns from that stuff.
We had some funny things in our team that we sometimes, when we're in a review meeting and I say, well, I did this code review, and can you tell me what you were thinking of this method? And then the team starts to discuss stuff, and then some of the people just say, well, I'm not sure if I made any contribution. Then that's the moment that I dive in, because then they're trying to push it away from them, and then I do right-click and say, because I probably know that he did contribute to it. Then I would just do a blaming on the spot, because that's bad. You should.
Who owns the code? I normally
The
say
team
that
owns the code,
the
right?
team owns the code and not the
Yeah.
person. So
Yeah.
if you wrote some code and I saw that you broke some pattern,
Yeah.
I could change that code, and you would be fair with that.
Yeah, sure.
It don't be a problem. And
No, but you need to learn from it. So
exactly.
we explain it, then you learn from it, and I would rather not see it again.
Right. I think I like the Norwegian way. It's a bit softer.
Oh yeah.
All right, so let's find out the messy stuff in here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we can look at is maintainability index. This is the whole stat maintainability index. Cyclomatic complexity is the one interesting, depth of inheritance, and the class coupling. So class coupling is more who are this class, who is it calling into, so that we know that there are many dependencies in there.
I'd like to add a few things here. There are certain rules for the levels of this complexities and stuff.
Yeah.
Can I list them up?
Sure.
Quickly?
Yeah.
The cyclomatic complexity, that's an academic measure. Zero.
Is that academic?
Yes, it's been a lot of academic studies on cyclomatic complexity. 0 to 10 is okay.
0 to
That's
10
green.
is okay. Great. Good.
10 to 20 or 10 to 15, people disagree a little bit. That is in the yellow area.
Okay.
That is something you should look at. If it's above 15 or 20, then it's in the red area. And normally I say that if it's above 40, it is what I would call the bleeding red area.
Right. Okay.
And
have we got anything above 40?
we can see class coupling, exactly the same scale.
Okay. Really?
So that's easy.
Okay.
Maintainability index, that goes from 0 to 100. So 100 is very good, and 0 is very bad. 60 to 100, that is the green area. 40 to 60 is the yellow area.
Which column are we talking about?
The maintainability index.
Okay.
And from 20 to 40, that is the red area.
Red.
And below 20 is the bleeding red.
Oh, thank you for those. I haven't heard those scales before. That's
well,
great.
the fun thing is that Visual Studio will mark it yellow or red if it's going into
That is a
bleeding
known bug,
area.
in fact, in Visual Studio.
It's a number.
That marks it green, yes.
It's a non-bug. It parks everything. It colors everything as green.
Yeah, I would say that color doesn't say anything else, that we have a successful result.
So no Visual Studio developers know they're doing the wrong thing.
Exactly. So you need to know the numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll tell Cameron Skinner about this one.
I have.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens in Visual Studio is they roll it up. So here you see 2000, which might you think, well, wait a minute, we just heard these numbers, and 2000, that would be very, very bad. But as a matter of fact, it rolls it up, so we can dive in deeper and deeper.
So why have you chose this one to drill into?
Well, because it's this very high complexity over here, which looks really insane complexity here.
And TJ, is that the first one you'd open?
Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. I go into the highest numbers. They may indicate, as Marcel says, a sum of very many small functions. That may be a bad thing in itself. A class with too many methods is in itself a problem. So it's always good to go into the highest.
So it almost looked to me that both you skipped the maintainability and went straight for the cyclomatic complexity.
Because it stood out.
Right.
This one stood out, but there's an interesting thing, right? You see that maintainability index is pretty well here, but still we do have a very deep or a very high cyclomatic complexity. Now, this is something that doesn't resonate with me. Is that, well, how can I have a good maintainability while the complexity is so high? So that's the reason I dove in.
Right.
You also see the opposite there on this one with 60 maintainability. And the maintainability is mean values, by the way, and low cyclomatic complexity, and the coupling is not that high.
No.
Coupling of 14, right.
Yeah,
okay.
That's
all right, so let's go into our first bad boy here.
Yeah, we can dive into what we have here, domain. And then we have, for example, this one is 270, which is pretty high. So this is a client class. But you see that it all adds up all the methods. And I'm kind of more interested in, at the method level, what the cyclomatic complexity is, because it tells me more than on the class level. Because if it's a big class, that might be okay. It also is a little bit of a smell, because normally you end up with more granular pieces of classes. But yeah.
There's one trick we can use here to find those methods since it's sums up. And that is simply to move this stuff over to Excel.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to do.
And why are we going to move it to Excel?
To simply be able to sort it easier and scope it, because there's the facilities within this small tool window is not good enough.
Okay.
To easily quickly find the stuff.
Is that right? Okay, so let's take it to Excel.
Open it in Excel. It would fire up Excel here. We go over here. And now we have the Excel sheet, and we can look and see if we can find stuff.
Then we can go to the scope menu and just scope it down to member.
Yeah, member. Okay. And see. So now we're at the function level.
Oh, it's a shame we can't filter over there.
Exactly. It's a shame.
And now go and sort this one. So we can sort this one largest to smallest, and then we see cyclomatic complexity of 13, get timesheet day class. So we might pick this guy over here.
And that's your first bad boy.
Yeah,
probably is.
If you look at those numbers, you can see that none of this, they always have cyclomatic complexity in the yellow range.
Yeah.
Right.
So that means that may be okay. But if you look at the maintainability index,
it's very low.
You see 39 in the red, 25 close to bleeding red.
Right.
21 is very close to bleeding red. So you see here we have 21, 27, 31, 25, 39. Right. There we have 5 methods which is suspicious.
Right, okay. So I love, you see those ones and you just see red all over them.
Scroll over and so take a look at the coupling on those, see if that is the issue. And indeed, you see 37 on one of theirs. The second one there is that one.
This one is a very scary one. So this save method is probably one that we're not so fond of.
Exactly.
All right.
Try and find this guy.
So you both agreed to drill into this one first?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
All right.
Go to Visual Studio. Control Shift F.
Took us a long time to get to some code.
I know,
talking all the time.
Yeah. So let's see if we can find it.
But I do find it interesting that you go through a series of steps before you just dive in and start messing around with the code, because there's a sea of code there, and you really want to, you've taken some time just so you laser focus into the first one.
Exactly. Right. What I try to do is, it should not be my opinion on what is good or bad code. You should first agree with the team upon the rules.
Right.
And that very often should be the rules stated by these tools.
Or we improve the rules bit by bit. Do some of these things end up in your definition of done? in Scrum, or
it's
it's
more
just
generic definition of done. So
generic.
what we have is for our product, we have a generic definition of done, and we have small definitions of done on the stories.
Okay.
So in the generic definition of done, we say that we have a certain set of rules. We have guidelines on how you do right coding.
Can you give me one example that might end up in your generic definition of done?
Yeah, so one of the generic definitions of done we have is that in a build we always have the code analysis on, and there are no rules excluded without any comments. So that's one of the things that we have as a higher level definition of done.
Okay. Do you modify your definition of done?
I agree with the concept you say. I haven't called it a generic definition of done, but in fact it is.
Yeah.
I don't think generic definition of done is part of the Scrum PDF. Okay. All right.
Well, what we do, we have what we call quality builds, and in those quality builds we have the same rules as Marcel mentioned.
Okay.
It's not allowed to have warnings. You should clear the warnings. You should not have. You should comment out whatever stuff. If you take out something, you should comment it out, so clearly what it is, and so on. So that's
Okay. So
like I said, Scrum is not our goal, right? Scrum will help me do my project better, so I don't care if it's not in Scrum.
Right. Depends how religious you are.
Yeah, I'm not religious.
When we find something here, we'll get that what we find to be acted upon to do something about that. We'll put into those sprinters as a normal.
So I found the first reference to this method, so I can dive into it with F12, and now I see that this interface that's been implemented. So I need to find where. So this is one of the things I always find painful with interfaces. That this, how do you find where it's implemented the right way? So I now need to find here. Go Control F.
There we got it.
That guy over here. Yeah. Thank you. So what we see here is the implementation of the method that had high coupling, high cyclometric complexity. So we can have a look here and see what we think of this.
So we can see there's some validation up front.
So one of the things that I like to do is go from top to bottom and see what it actually does. And I always talk to my developers and say, I want to read through my code like poetry. So I just want to know what it does. Okay. So what I would expect here to see is in my save method some calls to validate something.
Yes.
And then do an actual save or something. Or
so one line for validation, which is a call.
Yeah, and that would be a call, and then might be some different calls that I need to do, trigger an event or whatever that the save occurred, or that kind of stuff. But I would like to read it like I can read the steps and understand what it does.
Right.
That is what we normally call the tell, don't ask principle.
The tell, don't ask
The tell,
principle.
don't ask principle.
Has that got anything to do with the American army?
I don't think so. It's still a good principle. We need, if you look here, there's the first two lines of code, you see you pick something out of something.
Right.
Probably to do something with it later. Why? Just tell it to do something. Like Marcel says there, I would do a validate command to this stuff with some the parameters. Send that away and do the next whatever it is. Down here we have to look and have a series of commands so you can read it like poetry. I like that way of stating it.
And so your poetry must be short, is that right?
You don't like a poem.
Should be a short poem, right?
Well, it can be long, but then it needs to capture my attention, and it needs to be good. It needs to be crisp.
Okay. You don't like waffle in there?
No, thanks.
Okay.
So yeah, so what we see here is just a lot of validation going on. So let's see.
And you also see that it's this repeated blocks of
code. So,
Could this be a method, and this parameter sent it to the same method, and so on and so on.
Right.
Yeah, it's all validation errors. So, next we get, what do we have here?
Calculations or something.
Okay, calculations going on. So we have first validation and calculation.
But this is better, because here at least it's called some methods to do the stuff. So immediately we now saw that this was calculations.
Yeah, we see calculate time. So I like the phrasing of the methods. So that's good. Still, we do have validation, calculation. So now what are we going to do next?
Another validation.
We start doing validation again, okay. And then we see overlapping time checks.
Sounds like more validation.
Yeah. So one of the things I don't like about this code is there's no comments in there. What are we doing here? Why are we doing here? Yeah, that kind of triggered my attention that this is the first comment I come across in this code base. So
do you like comments as well, TJ?
I like people to. There's two cases of putting in comments. One is to put in comments like it's done here to explain that method. But very often that comment can be used as the name of the method to be called. So you can, it's part of a refactoring way of doing things.
Yeah. So often you're fine without any comments if they're beautiful method names.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I'm always want my devs to do is if we have some complex code going on, for example, we do stuff which has to do with multi-threading and that stuff, then you want to know if something is not locked, for example, so they didn't use a lock statement. I want to have the comments in there why they didn't use the lock statement, because then it helps me understand that they thought about it, but they didn't do it because there was a good reason not to do it.
Okay, all right.
You explain what is the difference from the normal patterns, so that people don't get surprises.
So let's keep looking through this.
So one of the things that's very bad here is the sheer complexity of this method. Right? What we see here is that we already started at line 58 and we're going all down the bottom, and then we end up, where do we end? 158. So
100 lines of code.
100 lines of code. So that's very. So this will probably become. Where all your bugs will hide.
Right.
It's also interesting things. So you see this comment here, check if an empty time
check if an empty time day. Yep.
That could be moved into record. If you go further down here,
that could be what?
Is this going to be refactored into method?
Yeah.
With that name.
Yeah.
But look, go further down to below that comment. Here you see do validation and other stuff here. And does it do that? It do a unit of work commit.
Interesting.
And then it just says something. These methods doesn't seem to indicate that it probably do other stuff, but it doesn't do validation.
Right.
We had validation on top of the stuff.
Okay.
So here the comment is out of line with.
I at least would have a talk with my team.
Yeah. So you want him to fix the way he's done that validation.
Yeah.
And put that out into another method. Yeah. All right. So how do you tell him? Are you going to have a chat, or can we use this tool in any way?
You could go into the code metrics results.
Yeah, so one of the things we can do is we can now use, for example, code review and add code review comments.
That's
that's one of the things.
So that's brand new. Let's just do it.
Okay, let's do it. One of the things that we need to do here is then go to Team Explorer. Yeah, so one of the things we can do is start a code review in the team tools.
Okay, this is a brand new feature.
Yeah, it's a brand new feature.
Can we just right-click and create a code review?
Unfortunately, we can't. So what we can do is...
Can we check the right-click menu?
Sure we can. So what I would like to do is say, for example, here, right-click and say just add a comment or start a code review or whatever. The idea behind is that I will now ask for a code review first.
So the developer asks for a code review?
The developer asks for a code review, sends it off to me.
Right.
And I would start doing the code review.
Right, but you've just started doing a code review without any permission. Now what do you do?
Yeah. So... yeah, what we now need to do is make sure that this file gets attached to the code review I want to do. Okay. So for that, I need to add a space or a comment in there so that it will get checked out. Okay. And then it becomes...
Let's do that.
Yeah, so I...
just add a space.
Yeah, add a space here. And, now it's checked out. And now what I can do is say, okay, in the actions menu in Team Explorer, go and say, I would like to request a code review.
Of yourself. Okay.
Yeah, so I will file a code review to myself and say, well,
the name
Marcel,
is you. Yep.
Enter a subject, check this code, and next I will submit this request. I will save this file because then it gets attached to this particular code review. Okay. So now I'm in my work again, and I see that a code review is available for me. So now I can start and doing the code review.
Bit of bureaucracy here, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a little...
It's a workaround.
It's a workaround. You can work with it. Okay. So what you see is that my file is over here. Yep. And now I am in code review mode.
Right. Okay. And why are we in a merge conflict looking thing?
Because it just changed. I changed the file, right? So that's the reason I now see...
this is part of... They have been thinking about that the developer requests a review. Yes. So you will now be looking at your code versus what's on the server. Right. And you have problem and done something you want the senior developer to have a look at.
Okay.
That's why to us now it will be a bit more confusing since we only added a space. But
yeah. So what we would do is go back to the save method because there we were, and now I would add code reviews in here. So I would go to the save method and then say, well, this stuff over here, we kind of decided that we wanted to make it more readable, more crisp, more. So what we would do here is select this piece of code here. Say, what I would like you to do here is I would add a comment on that. So I would right-click here and say add a comment.
Yep.
And next, I can now say, please refactor to multiple validation methods.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Great, done. Nice. And enter doesn't save it. You have to click off it.
I don't know. I need to click save.
Okay.
Control enter.
Yeah, right. There we go. All right. Cool. So this is you would now keep going through this until you'd hit things that were okay. And now we're finished with code metrics. The next thing. What's the next thing?
The next thing could be static code analysis.
Okay. All right. So what, you just check that they're all turned on?
That's at least one of the things I would do. So,
okay, let's do that.
And we can just look at that and just right-click any solution and see if they have, in effect, turned it on. So on the properties window.
There's one thing here. You can run static code analysis straight off without turning it on because here is a turning on analysis on build.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would normally not do that.
Really?
I would prefer to just right-click the project and run code analysis.
Yeah,
because that's run even without that.
But wouldn't it be just if you put it as a check-in policy, then we don't have to bother running it?
I will never put that as check-in policy. It takes too long time.
Oh.
I know there's an option to do that.
We
normally have a quality build running on the server. It does that thing.
Yeah, so we just turn it on at build time instead of forcing my devs to wait a long time.
And the cool thing is that on build time, you have the option to tell it to always run, to ignore the setting here, the project file, which means that the developer can have an experience without being nagged by that static code analysis all the time, but run it when it needs to run it, and but still make it run on the build time.
Yeah, and you can run it on the solution level as well. So then it should give me all the stuff.
So you both agree with not having it as a check-in policy, but do we agree on how many of the rules we have on?
Yes. Well, I don't know if we agree on all the rules, but what we've done is we created our own code analysis set that we want to enforce, and we have different.
Can you roughly tell us what's involved?
So one of the things we have at the server level, we always want to have all the security rules on because we want to really make sure we don't have SQL injection attacks and that stuff going on.
Do you turn those ones on?
Some of them, yes, to turn on.
What's next?
So what's next is just running through the code and looking for anti-patterns.
Right, okay.
Patterns that we are used to that are a bad smell in my code and that might ruin, for example, memory management or that kind of stuff, or congestion on logs and that stuff.
Right, okay. Right. All right, so what type of, and what way do we find these anti-patterns? Just skimming through the code?
Yeah, it's kind of doing a more detailed level code review. So you go through the code and say, well, what's good and what's bad. So we can just do some of that stuff.
Is it just finding anti-patterns, or is it also finding, good patterns that they keep overusing?
Oh, yes, certainly. So one of the things that we see a lot is that there's this notion of dependency injection and using containers, for example. One of the things we see is that people are starting overusing that.
Right. Okay.
And then I go about and say, well, the only reason for me to have a container in there is because I need a pluggable architecture or something. So I have this common rule that I only want to add complexity when I need flexibility.
Okay.
If that's not the case, I just want to have simple code.
Can you say that again? That was beautiful.
So I only want to add complexity when I need flexibility.
Right, okay.
So that's very important.
Is that your own quote?
I don't know, I think.
And do you concur with what Marcel said? Do you see overuser patterns as well?
Yes, what I say is that people tend to go to the extremes. They either start to use, let's say we say you need to increase the abstractness of the application, and then they start to put interface on everything.
Yeah.
And instead of, they make, for example, a customer then I have an interface called iCustomer, which is simply nothing but a public interface of the customer already, so there's no need for it.
Right.
And all interfaces, for example, should be in behavior type, changeable, invoiceable, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and especially with link, for example, are also very interesting patterns. So I like link a lot. But you can overuse that as well. So what you see is that we get a link statement with multiple levels of lambdas going on. And I really like people that if they have multiple statements in a lambda, please make it just a method, because I can read it. You just get through the flow of the document instead of looking for, well, where would this method get called, or when will it actually be called.
Okay,
so,
all right.
Yeah.
So we skimmed through all the code looking for anti-patterns or overuse of patterns.
But when you say skim through, I think both Marcel and I are doing the same. We go, as you saw, if we had the warnings here, we go into that code. We use the metrics, we go into that code. We use the static code analysis. If I turn all the rules here, we would have so much food.
Right.
So we wouldn't need to really skim it at random. We will skim based on that analysis we already done. So they point us to the right side of the code. There's no way we can go through everything.
Right. So you don't just randomly choose things.
No.
You are drilling into all the via the tools.
One interesting observation I've had is that when I hit something like, for example, implement iDisposable, or something like that that's not implemented correctly, or do not raise exceptions, stuff like that. The interesting thing with this one, for example, is to see code that is not being implemented at all. Why is that there? And the next thing is, very often that code points to some other problem. It's like bad code attracts warnings. But it's not necessarily that warning you get that is the bad code in itself. That's why I say you start with these things, you look at the code and say, hey, here they are switching on types, for example. They are breaking, they could use polymorphism instead.
Right.
Or they could have encapsulated it differently. Stuff like that.
Right. Okay. So what's next after we've looked through that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I already touched up on a little bit is using containers, for example. So one of the things you see is that it kind of hides the dependencies that are in place, right? If I use containers or I use reflection, I do have dependencies, but I cannot discover them with these tools. So that's what we call static versus dynamic dependency.
Okay.
And dynamic dependency will fail on you when you run the code, and a static dependency might fail on you while you compile. So that's kind of the difference, right?
Are you saying you don't like reflection?
The reflection is good, as Marcel said, when you need it.
Right.
But if I have, say, pure reflection, I will much more prefer to use a framework like Unity or MEF to do that and use some pure reflection.
So when you see reflection, you start questioning, should we be using MEF or Unity?
Exactly. What are they trying to achieve? And one thing one never do is to try to replace static dependencies with dynamic dependency just to believe that you're really removing a dependency, because you're not.
That's an important point.
You're just fooling the compiler. You're taking it's like I, as a developer, know that I have this dependency, but you, as a compiler, is not allowed to know it.
Yeah.
Have you seen that very often?
Yes.
Yeah, you see that all the time. You see that all the time, especially with the containers and dependency injection going on. And especially when people want to they kind of change their code because they want to make it testable, but then they start doing it, overdoing it, and they start doing unit testing like, I'm going to test if the .NET engine still does its work, right?
Okay.
And those are also anti-patterns that we see in our code base.
So can I just confirm, when a developer's gone to the trouble of making their architecture pluggable with, say, MEF, you will actually make them take it out?
Not if that's part of the ID. But
Right.
if they do, let's say that you have a domain class here, and you go in and say, hey, I talk to these architects, and they said you need to make things pluggable and use dependency injection, and then it takes all its domain objects and puts that into MEF.
Yeah.
Right.
And
That was not the idea, because you only wanted few things that you needed to plug in.
Okay, all right. So what's next?
You simply work with the code using good refactoring patterns, good object-oriented patterns. There's a set of rules that can be used to help, and one is a set of GRASP, which is stands for General Responsibility Assignment Software Patterns.
Yeah.
So you would look at that pattern before all the ones of
set
solid?
Of patterns or rules. This includes coupling, cohesion, rules for how to do it, who's the information expert, how is that thing going to be done. That's very guidance patterns. Then you have the other principle, the solid principles, which is also a very good set of things to think about. Then they're not things like in the solid. You have some principles that are opposites, but you can still live with them. There's a guidance in them, more than rules to be followed to the end. The open-close principle, for example, it's not something that you can do in everything, because then you get an explosion of inheritance hierarchy out of that. But you should think about it in a way that you don't go in and mess with already existing classes. You make your modifications outside the class. You extend the classes. You make the class extensible. You make polymorphism the right way, so to follow the Lisk or substitution principle, by saying that every sub-object should be implementing all the methods from its parent. It should not be different things. You should implement is a kind of hierarchy, not just because I like it to be the same thing.
All right, you concur with those comments?
Yeah, I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And you'd use the grasp patterns before solid as well?
Yeah, because what I normally do is I take a look at what we saw with the complexity stuff going on, and for example the stuff we are dependent on different classes. If we are very heavily dependent on the other classes, then we don't have the right coupling going on. So a class needs to have a high cohesion and only calls out certain stuff, and it should not call for stuff, then get stuff handed over, and then start doing stuff on that other thing, right? So the example I always use is when the paperboy comes to my house and I want to give him a tip, I will go and give him a tip instead. What you see in object orientation, that people start doing, well, hi paperboy, can you hand me over your wallet? Then I get the wallet and I put the money in there, right? And that's kind of a...
They give back the wallet.
Yeah, and they give back the wallet. So that's strange, and we see that constantly in object orientation, and we see it constantly in these kinds of code bases.
People are making lots of properties to get it. One anti-pattern I look for is to see are there a lot of set properties.
Right.
Because I shouldn't need a set properties.
No, right.
Because if I'm needing a lot of setters, that as an indication that I'm on the outside, I'm picking out all your internal stuff and messes with it and put it back into you.
Yeah. That
and
doesn't
since
make
I
sense.
don't know anything about your constraints,
Right.
I need your rules too. And much better to give you the stuff, give you the money,
hand it over,
and you take out your wallet and put it into there. And you handle the stuff and from the right pocket or whatever. You know where your wallet is.
That's a great example, because no one wants to give their wallet to someone.
Right, no, and I would have to ask for his interface, I want to tip you.
Yes.
That would be good, okay? And then multiple people, so now I can tip multiple people if they implement iTippable.
Right.
Right, that's kind of the idea, and that works way better than asking for somebody's wallet and then stuff.
That's awesome.
Well, stuff like what you're talking about, a lot of science we're looking for. Typecasting is also sign of stuff. So you need something, but you as a developer know better than the compiler, so I don't want the interface you're giving me, I need another one. And I know that you really also implement that, but the compiler has no clue.
Right.
So typecasting is kind of the same thing. I'm picking out your internals and know something about you which you yourself don't know.
Okay. Well, it looks like we could go on with this forever, but I do want to just ask you, how do you give the feedback back? Do you both follow Scrum?
Yes.
And do you do this at the sprint review, or do you call over a developer and show your findings?
You know, when it's do you follow Scrum? It's like that you have to answer yes. If not, you sound like an idiot.
You would have been in trouble.
Yes, I'm in trouble. But
we're doing Scrum Bot, so
yeah, we're doing Scrum Bot is what we're doing, and then I work with many different teams, and they are at the different maturity levels.
Right.
So some are very good Scrum teams, some are just starting in that direction. So there's a mixture of Scrum, Kanban technology. Try to use as much and try to push them in the right direction.
I'm wondering how you give this feedback back, and I'm also wondering whether this code review feature that's just been added, whether you think that will change the way that you interact.
I need to give it a try because I'm not so. Like I said, as a product owner, I do code reviews, but I won't bother my devs first. So I need to file now code review items for myself, and then start typing in there, and then give it back to a developer. I need to figure out if the flow will work for my team. Currently, I use Excel spreadsheets for it. So what I do is I go through the code. We implemented a little plugin that I can right-click just in Word and just add a comment and then go through and then dump it into an Excel sheet later on. And that is what I use to have at least in my team meeting, have a conversation on the smells I found.
Right.
And then sometimes I use it at the review meeting because it might be the reason that I will not close the story because I think it's not done yet.
Yes.
I can also decide to close the story but file it as a set of bugs and then hand it later on.
Okay.
We normally use add-ins to Visual Studio, which exist
You
out
mean
there.
extensions?
Extensions, yes. And so we right-click the code and we create the work item or type code review.
Right.
And I want that code review work item to get into the next sprint. Or if it's low priority to later sprint, preferably as soon as possible, so that the Scrum Master of the team, he should look up the list and then see this needs to be done in the sprint, so they don't get the technical depth.
Right.
Try to minimize the technical depth.
Okay.
So using the work items for that purpose, I found it's very, very useful. And it's into the workflow of the TFS.
Okay. So I don't want to finish this demonstration without the little crown jewel in Visual Studio 2011 or Visual Studio 11, the finding duplicate code.
Oh, code.
Can we just do that? So we, because it'd be a shame to have done this whole thing without calling that.
This is so valuable.
So what we could do is, let's say, right-click over here and say, well, I would like to find matching clones in solution. And it will go through and we'll start scanning.
But you don't even have to be that smart either. You could just say scan the entire solution.
Oh yeah. I can even do that. Yeah.
There's a difference there. If you look for small blocks like this, you must use it this way. If you use the scan of a whole solution, it will not find clones less than 8 lines.
Yeah.
Oh right.
Yeah. So the clone.
Why did they do that?
Because of noise.
Noise and performance, because if they would search for each individual line, they would find a high rate of false positives.
Right.
Yeah, that's the reason they chose 8.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, this guy's still.
All right. Well, while that's processing, I'd just like to thank you for giving us your time. I think I found it totally fascinating, and I think a lot of the viewers out there will be able to, do better code from these lessons. Thank you very much, Marcel. Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.
Before you go, I've got a task for you. Go to tv.ssw.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You'll be informed of all upcoming videos. In addition, if you're super keen, I'm all about inspecting and adapting. So send me an email or send me a tweet @Adam Kogan. Cheers.